So I'm going to show you a simple recipe to make a simple pastry dough. You can use this dough to make pies, galettes, but we're going to be making some pineapple empanadas. And I'm going to walk you through every step so that you can make this at home. This dough is kind of an evolution of dough that my grandma used to make and what my mom's made. Once you have a dough, you can use it to make savory empanadas and sweet empanadas. We're gonna make sweet empanadas, but if you wanna make a savory dough, you can just omit the sugar and the cinnamon and you can fill it like ground beef or chicken tinga or cheese and chili. So there's so many variations, but we're gonna make a sweet dough which has some cinnamon and sugar in it. So this dough is super simple, made with pantry staples. We have all-purpose flour, we have granulated sugar, some eggs, baking powder, ground cinnamon, vegetable shortening, salt, and some milk. Super simple ingredients to get started making our pastry dough. So I'm going to be using a stand mixer, but if you don't have a stand mixer, you can easily make this in a bowl. Literally just with your hands, combine all your dry ingredients, and then you're going to add in your liquid ingredients, your milk and your eggs, and then you can combine that with a bowl. But I don't want to get my hands dirty, so I'm going to cheat and use a stand mixer. Also, I'm using baking powder versus baking soda. I know they're interchangeable, but with baking powder, it really has that power to help that dough get nice and tender and rise, not only before you bake it, but during baking. We're going to start with the dry ingredients. We're going to start with the flour, and we need 3 cups of flour. So let me scoop that out. And with flour, you want to be sure to not pack your flour. That's a big no-no when it comes to baking. I never trust my husband to bake because he always packs the flour, and it's not a pretty thing. So just level it off. Get your flour, and we want 3 cups. If you pack your flour, you are going to get more flour than you need. When it comes to brown sugar, it'll usually say to pack that because you want a full serving. With flour, it's nice and light that it'll fill exactly with what you need versus packing it, you're just gonna get more than what you really need. So we have 3 cups of flour. And then half a teaspoon of salt. And with salt, even though this is a sweet empanada, salt really adds and just emphasizes all of those flavors. So don't be afraid that we're putting salt in a sweet pastry dough. Then some baking powder. We're gonna do 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And what's nice is I love that this has like your automatic little level on here. Smart little invention, that canister. We're adding some ground cinnamon, and then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. If you want to use the same dough for savory empanadas, just omit the sugar and the ground cinnamon. And now we're going to add this to the mixer, and we're going to combine these just till everything's combined, and then we'll add in the rest of the ingredients. So you want to make sure that you combine all your dry ingredients before you add in all your wet ingredients. You don't want to have just one speck of ground cinnamon in one bite and sugar all in one section. So you really want to incorporate all those ingredients before you start adding in your wet ingredients. And if you don't have a stand mixer at home, you can easily do this with a spoon or a whisk. You just want to make sure those are nice and everything's incorporated. You don't see any cinnamon anywhere in there. Now we're going to add in the shortening. And so the shortening, also, if you don't have a stand mixer, you can use a pastry cutting tool to combine that with the dry ingredients, or you can even use a potato masher and just mash that all up with the dry ingredients. So you want to make sure that this is well incorporated until we add in your milk and eggs. And it's similar to any pie dough that you're adding butter. So you just want those small crumbles and make sure your shortening is just really well incorporated into those dry ingredients. And so now you can see the shortening is incorporated. You can see some little balls of shortening in there, and that's perfect. And that's exactly what you want before you start adding in your milk and your eggs. We're using half a cup of milk. And if you don't want to use milk, I've actually made this recipe with beer too, which really gives it an amazing flavor when you're making like a savory empanada. So you can actually use water as well. So I love just the flavor of the combination of the milk with this dough. Now we're gonna add 2 eggs, and I'll just go ahead and use the same measuring cup and just add them in here. And I'm gonna whisk the eggs in the measuring cup before I incorporate it into the stand mixer. It's always safe to break your eggs in a separate little dish before you add it all in. You never want to accidentally drop a shell in there. That's never any fun. And you want to whisk your milk and eggs together. You just want to make sure that the egg yolks are broken. You'll still have that mixing process in the mixer, or if you're doing it by hand. But just as long as you have those egg yolks broken, you should be safe to go. This dough is super forgiving. Now we're going to add it into our dry ingredients. And we're going to blend this. And you can see the dough is already combining by itself, and you want to continue to mix it and combine it till it all comes together. Look at this dough, so soft, so pretty. You could see the little flecks of cinnamon in there. Gonna be a nice and soft and tender dough, perfect for your empanadas. So what I like to do once your dough comes together is I like to separate it in two. It just makes it easier to roll once you're ready to get to that process. When my mom makes empanadas, she usually does it like if she's making flour tortillas, and makes little dough balls and rolls each ball of dough into like a flat little surface. I'm not that fancy. I like to make it a workable dough and use it like if I'm making a pie dough and roll the whole thing. So I'll show you a little shortcut. But what I'm gonna do is just wrap these up with saran wrap and refrigerate them. And you can even do this, you know, day before, 2 days before, and then have your filling ready and just assemble when you're ready to make your empanadas.
So today we're going to be making Roman style pizza, but what exactly does Roman style mean? In Rome, there are 2 basic styles of pizza that I'm at least aware of, and one of them is called pizza al taglio. It's a thicker style pizza, and I think in the States, people often refer to it as Sicilian sometimes. It's not exactly the same as you see it here, but it's basically a square pizza that's baked in pans and has a higher rise to it. And then there's the second kind called pizza tonda, which basically means like the round pizza. And we're going to be making that style today. It's a round, thin crust style pizza that you actually take a rolling pin to. And I think a lot of people in the pizza world would see that almost as a sacrilege, that you've done all this work to a dough and made it nice and airy, and then you're popping out all that air. But to be quite honest with you, it's a style that I really like. So all you need to know to make good pizza, whether you're doing Roman pizza, Sicilian pizza, or Neapolitan pizza, is 3 things: water, flour, and some form of yeast. And what makes it special or unique is the ways in which you combine those things in terms of the ratio. And that's the one secret I can't give away today, but I'm going to show you how you can come up with your own recipe. So for my money, I think there are 2 basic steps to making a good pizza dough. And one of my tricks is that I like to make what I call a pre-ferment. And what that means is that I take my pizza ingredients and I mix them one day prior to making the pizza and let them sit out at room temperature for the entire evening. Hopefully for a full 24 hours, but I'd say at least 12 hours. So 12 to 24 hours you want to make this pre-ferment. All of this is done with just your hands. All you need is hands and ingredients and nothing else. So you're taking flour, you're taking water. That was my bread flour. This is the water. This is the whole wheat flour that's going in. And then I'm gonna opt to use this mother yeast that we make here. And like I said, if you don't have the mother yeast, you can always use commercial yeast. So when you're mixing this flour and water together, all you want to make sure of is that there's no dry clumps. So I'm getting into the corners, onto the bottom of the container, and just moving around the edges to make sure that all that flour is incorporated. It's not rocket science, it's just making sure that there's no dry flour, that everything is fully incorporated. And I know at this point it doesn't look like much, it just looks like a sloppy slurry in here, but over time and overnight, what you're gonna see is this thing is gonna bubble up a little bit, it's gonna increase in volume, it's gonna start to look airy, and then it looks like you've done something pretty significant. So this is the process by which you're introducing a lot of flavor to your pizza dough, and you're also making it more digestible because it's breaking down all the sugars in that flour, and it's gonna make it delicious and digestible at the same time. So you wanna rest this at room temperature overnight. And by room temperature, I mean roughly 60 to 80 degrees. Anywhere in that window will be fine. If you're a few degrees lower than 60, a few degrees higher than 80, then you're okay. You just don't wanna have it in a very hot area, so don't put it right next to an oven or a heater, and don't put it right next to an air conditioner, or definitely don't put it in the refrigerator. So as you can see, this is the pre-ferment that we just made. And then this is what it looks like the next day. As I said, it starts to bubble up. It almost triples in volume, so long as your yeast is doing its job. And so that's why I recommend that you try to use commercial yeast at home first, because I don't want you to be discouraged by, hey, my mother yeast wasn't doing its work. We've been working with mother yeast for a long time, so we know how to feed it, when to feed it, and making sure that it's constantly bubbling and constantly alive. But this is what you want, and you'll end up with this if you just use the dry powdered yeast that you buy in the store. This right now, as you can see, is very alive, and if you smell it, it's got like a kind of funky sour aroma, and that's a good thing. This is kind of the basis of making sourdough bread. So I often tell people that if you know how to make pizza dough, you also know how to make sourdough bread, because that's essentially what it is. So we're gonna take this now and we're gonna mix it with some more flour. So this was just the process that we administered to give the dough some really good nuanced flavor and to make it super digestible. Now we're gonna finish the process of actually making the dough itself. So we're gonna take this beautiful living creature that's been sitting on our counter overnight, and we're just gonna use our hands here as much as possible and get it all out into a bowl. And the whole process of making pizza dough can be done easily by hand, as you're about to see. And we're just gonna feed this now with some more water, some salt, and some more of that bread flour. And what you're looking for here is a pretty wet dough. And contrary to what you might think, it's a little bit counterintuitive that if you want a crispy pizza and something that's going to have a good crunch to it, the wetter the dough, the more crispy it's going to be. Because if you're cooking pizza in a pizza oven or at home on a pizza steel, you need to have the dough wet enough so that it can spend a lot of time on that oven floor before it burns. And that's how you achieve a crispy dough. So once this mass is starting to come together, it doesn't need to be fully incorporated. You turn it all out onto a deck. And that's just the word that we use for tabletop. If you don't have a fancy marble tabletop at home, this will work on stainless steel. It'll work well on a nice big butcher block as well. But really, any flat, dry surface, the key is to have it nice and dry so you're not introducing any foreign moisture to it. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to bring it all together. And as you can see, it's very sticky. It's sticking to my hands a lot. That's a good thing. It's going to look like a mess for quite a while until it starts to look like something that looks more like pizza dough. And that's perfectly fine. Now, as sort of a speed scratch, if you wanted to make this process go a lot faster, you can use a KitchenAid mixture, if you have one of these mixers at home, with a dough hook. And you throw it in there and put it on like high speed for about 10 minutes and you can accomplish this in about half the time. But I'd say that if you want to use your hands, and I think it's fun to use your hands, especially if you're making pizza for the first time, that you do it this way and you work it for 20 minutes because it's going to give you a sense of how this dough feels and what you're looking for in terms of moisture content. And you'll notice that as it gets worked, it's going to dry up. It's not really drying up, but what's going to happen is that it's absorbing the flour and is getting worked. The gluten is being developed, and you'll end up with a smooth texture on the outside. So at this point in the kneading process, while it's really still very wet and not completely formed, there's really no way you can mess this up. You just want to keep attacking it and keep working it in and out. And, you know, I generally like to use the palms of my hands because you get the most force there. You can see how it's now pulling away easier from my fingers, right? It's much less messy. And what you have is a much smoother exterior, right? So this is kind of what you're looking for. When I stretch it, it doesn't have those grains anymore. It's much, much smoother. It's beautiful. You can still see those like little specks of the whole wheat that I was talking about, which add a lot of flavor and texture to this dough. And from here, we're pretty much ready to portion up our dough. And I think that one of the important things about making pizza or any kind of dough product at home is to know the size of the portions that you're working with. And with pizza in particular, you want to make sure if you're having some friends over and you want to cook for them, it's okay if your pizzas are different shapes, but you don't want one person to have a tiny little pizza and another person to have a really big pizza. And one of the only ways you can make sure that everybody's getting the same portion is with a scale. And I encourage every home cook to have one of these scales because I think it has so many uses when you get into baking and cooking at home. So we've discovered that working with this dough, that if you get it to 170 grams, that's the perfect size for a 11 to 12 inch pizza, which is like, for me, a perfect personal pie. Now, if you're eating a 12-inch pie of Neapolitan dough, maybe you're gonna be a little more full, but the beautiful thing about these pizzas is that they're gonna be super thin crust. And you'll see that using just 170 grams, which in my estimation is a relatively small pizza, you're gonna have a pretty wide circumference. I'm gonna cut off a piece. And it's okay if they're in a couple little pieces because they're all gonna come together at the end. So now that we have our portion doughs, we're gonna take these guys and we're gonna form little balls. And all you're doing is you're just forming your hand like a cup so that it's not flying away from you, and then just rolling it around. And by doing that, you've accomplished a nice round ball. And then you just want to tighten up that skin a little bit by taking your hand, and you're going to have your pinky on the bottom, always in contact with the countertop, and just pulling. And you want to make sure that as you're pulling that you're going quickly, because if you go too slowly on the pulling technique, then you're going to stick to the dough because it's very, very moist. So the great thing about this dough, the way that we've made it, is that since we've done that beautiful pre-ferment, we've gotten a head start on flavor and fermentation. So now we can use this dough today if we wanted to, and if that were the case, we just leave these at room temperature, lightly covered, for about another hour or so until they have a chance to proof, and then we're ready to work with the dough and make pizza.
So for this particular class, I think a really perfect side is a buttermilk biscuit. Light, fluffy, tender, if it's done well. And I'm going to show you all the ways to do that and to achieve really that nice, tender, flaky biscuit. Again, I think it's one of these items that can be intimidating to some people, but if you follow what I'm doing, I'm going to show you exactly how to achieve it. This is where there's a little bit less experimentation. Certainly you can add your own items. If you want to add cheddar cheese or you want to add Old Bay seasoning or chives, you can do that. So there is room for a lot of experimentation, but as far as the basic technique, it's important that people follow that pretty much to a T. So for this segment, we're going to be doing the buttermilk biscuits. It's one of my favorite things to do with fried chicken. You can make a little sandwich out of it the next day and have it with eggs, like an egg and cheese biscuit. It's really, really delicious, and it's really simple to make. There's a couple of key things to know before you get started about the biscuits. You never want to use a rolling pin ever whenever you roll out the dough. You want to pat it with your hands, and the reason why is because using the rolling pin is going to form too much gluten, which is going to make a really really chewy, textured dough. It's not going to give you that light, tender, flaky biscuit that you're looking for. The other thing that's of really, really paramount importance is just basically put all of your measured ingredients, including the butter, the baking powder, the baking soda, the salt, and the flour into the freezer prior to about 30 minutes prior to actually mixing up the biscuits. What that's going to do, the colder that everything is it's going to allow that butter to stay nice and cold in the dough, so the completed dough. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you these nice, tender, flaky pockets of butter that when it's in the oven and it starts to bake, it's going to rise. It's going to create those little air pockets. That's where you get your flakiness from. So it's really important to have cold ingredients. I've just measured out 2 cups of flour. There's only 5 more ingredients. It really couldn't be easier. I'm going to take 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to add that to the mix. I'm going to take 1 tablespoon of baking powder. This is baking powder, and you want to go with aluminum-free baking powder. You end up with a much better biscuit. And then you have the baking soda. A lot of people get these two mixed up, but the baking soda, you just need 1/4 teaspoon. It's important to be accurate. So when I'm measuring out the flour, I'm not saying, oh, maybe this looks like a cup and it's kind of heaping. Really take a butter knife and scrape the top of your flour like this to make sure that you have exactly 2 cups. It's really important in baking to be accurate, whereas in the fried chicken, you don't have to be so much. We're going to take a whisk, and you're just going to basically whisk all of these together. So all you're trying to do is just get all of the baking powder, the baking soda, the salt distributed evenly in the flour. Next, you're going to take your butter that's been chilled. And what I typically do is I'll take the 6 tablespoons and I'll give it a nice little rough chop. So about 1/2-inch pieces, throw it in the freezer with everything else, get it really nice and cold. And then I'm going to use one of these, a little dough cutter. Very inexpensive. You can get it for $5. And then I'm going to work it into the flour mixture. You can put all of these ingredients in the food processor, give it a few pulses, and it's done. And now I do like to use the food processor when I'm making a double batch of this, just because the less opportunity that you have to put warmth in contact with your ingredients, the more flake that you're going to end up with in the final biscuit. So food processor, you're not touching it with anything. It's just the blade going around and chopping everything the way that you need it to be done. The other way is if you don't have either of these items in your kitchen, which not everybody does, is you basically want to use 2 butter knives. Everybody has these. And you would go like this, cutting the butter back and forth. So pulling the knives into 2 different directions. And essentially you want to end up with pea size, like little green pea size pockets of butter throughout the flour. So this is a really easy way to do it. It takes a little longer than if you're going to use this guy, but it works all the same. I'm going to go around like this. I'm just going to make sure that all of the butter has the flour coating on it, so that whenever you start mixing like this, you really don't have too much that's going to tend to stick on this little guy right here. And if you have butter that sticks there, just take it off. Don't be afraid to touch it. It's okay if you do add a little bit of warmth to it. I mean, the coldness is really what we're looking for, but don't be afraid to touch it. You want little pea-sized pockets of butter. Something like this is actually perfect. So at this point, I think I've got my butter kind of where I need it, the size that I want it. I'm just going to take a quick feel, and I really think that's perfect. You want to keep these little pieces of butter flecks in there so that you can see them whenever you are finished and you have the dough ready to cut, because again, that's going to give you your rise, your flaky, tender pockets. It's buttermilk biscuits, so of course we're going to add buttermilk. 1 cup. All the way around. I usually give it a whirl. And it's basically going to give us that tang that we're looking for in the fried chicken as well. There's just something about buttermilk that really can't be replicated with anything else. I'm going to take a fork, and I'm just going to make sure that all of these ingredients are really well incorporated, right? I'm just going to give it a stir. This should be a really wet dough. It should not be dry at all. But if you follow these measurements to a T, you should be fine before you actually roll out your dough. So essentially, we're going to gather this in a ball. But before we do that, before we put it on the table to pat it down and then cut our biscuits, this is a really good place for you guys to go off on your own and add your own unique flavors. You can do chives and cheddar cheese. You can do Old Bay seasoning. You can do really pretty much anything that you want at this point. Be creative. If you want ham and cheese, add little chunks of cooked ham. Make sure that it's cooked before. But add all of that in and do the same thing that we're about to do, the next step. You just proceed to the next step. And listen, one of my favorite things is a little bit of Old Bay, a little bit of cheddar cheese, a white cheddar cheese, and some ham, some good old country ham cubed up. Bacon is also really delicious. I think, who doesn't love bacon? So you want to get it to this point where you sort of make sure that all of this is combined. You don't want to lay it out yet. You just want to sort of go like this, give it a little pat. You can start to see, if you look, that there are some little flecks of butter. So here and here, pretty much everywhere. That's really what you're looking for. A nice sticky dough and lots of butter flecks. So when we're ready to actually roll out the dough, you want to make sure that your surface is got a little bit of flour on it, because the dough, again, the whole mixture is going to be a little bit wet. That's really the way that you want it. Just rub it around on the table. Take your little ball over here. We're going to gather this up. We're going to pat it down. And we're going to turn it like this. Okay? You can feel it all come together at this point. We're going to turn it again. We're going to go in one more time. Essentially, what you're doing here is that you're going to be creating little air pockets. It's sort of like if you were making a puff pastry. You're making the turns so that you then get these little layers. If you need a little extra flour, just give it a little dust. Smooth it out. That way it doesn't stick to anything. If you feel like you can't see any of those pockets of butter, take your dough, put it in the refrigerator, 5-10 minutes, and go from there. Okay, that's going to allow that butter to harden again. So just pat it out. Don't be afraid of it, but have a light enough touch. Okay. Very important rule of thumb when you're making biscuits. Most people, I think, naturally have a tendency to push down and twist so that you can release the biscuit from the cutter. Don't ever do that, because what that's going to do is shrink and close those layers. You just want to give it a nice little cut up and down, just like that. Sort of like if you've ever seen a Grand's biscuit or Pillsbury biscuit, the ones in the can, they have those little lines on the side, the little layers. You don't want to mess that up. You want to continue to keep that. So I'm just going to place these on the sheet tray. Now, if you want really super fluffy biscuits that are a little more fluffy on the outside, you would just put them together like this, nuzzle them all together on the sheet tray. If you want the sides to be a little more crunchy, then you would do the exact opposite of that. So basically, this tender fluffy on the outside, and this is going to give you nice and crunchy on the outside. It's all preference. I eat them both ways, whatever you want. I'll even throw on a couple of these little pieces. I don't want to disturb them too much, so I'm just going to put them on like this. They're still just as delicious as the regular ones. We've already preheated the oven to 450, and basically you're going to set your timer. 10 to 12 minutes is really the assured baking time. What I typically do is I'll set the timer for 10 minutes. That way, if I look at it at around the 10-minute mark and some part is browning a little bit more quickly than the other parts, I'll give it a quick turn. Most of us live in these small New York City apartments. If you're somewhere else in the world, you live in an urban area, you can totally understand that. So the kitchens are really small. Sometimes the appliances don't work as well, or they just have little quirks. We have quirky appliances here. And so, you know, if that's the case, start checking your biscuits at around 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And if you need to turn it, give it a quarter turn, just turn the sheet tray. Be quick about it, but just do it really, fast. And that way you have a little more control over the biscuits and the doneness.